Afternoon, everyone. This is Dave Dierks here, Dr. Dave Dierks. I want to introduce everyone to our webinar on behalf of the Quad Cities Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition, or the QCSAPC. I'd like to thank all of you for attending our 5th annual live event. Again, my name is Dr. Dave Dierks. I'm the chair, and I will be the MC of the event this afternoon. So this event would not be possible without our wonderful sponsors. And I'd like to give a huge thanks to RALI of Iowa, Genesis Philanthropy, the Center for Alcohol and Drug Services, or CADS, Robert Young, the Robert Young Center, UnityPoint, and of course, our wonderful members of the QCSAPC. Before we get started, I'd like to make a few notes that we're going to be, the group will be muted for, the attendance will be muted during the presentation. We will ask that you please put your questions on the icon. There's a Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. You can enter the question anytime during the presentation, and then at the end of the presentation, I will ask our guest speaker the questions, and we will go through them one by one. Also, we would love for you to fill out a survey. There will be a QR code at the bottom or at the end of the survey, and we would really appreciate if you could fill this out for us. We want to make this event better for next year, and with that feedback, we can definitely do that. So prior to the official introduction of our guest speaker, I'm going to we're going to play a 5-minute video, and it is also going to really talk about the potential consequences of opiates and drug and painkillers that may happen to us or our family members if we start getting addicted to these medications. I want to give our mission statement for the QCSAPC. Our mission is to engage and strengthen our community by providing substance abuse education through collaborative partnerships, and aim to raise awareness about the dangers of prescription drug misuse and abuse through prevention. So, all right, we're going to start the video right now. Must be having a small technical delay here. One moment.
This is the battlefield. This is the uncontrolled chaos of professional football. This is the brutal violence that can give an athlete everything and can cost almost everything. This is the game that for 23 years defined Randy Grimes, and the game that almost killed him. Randy Grimes was a college All-American and a 10-year veteran of the NFL. Through documented concussions, 6 knee surgeries, joint replacement, shoulder and tricep surgeries, and countless broken and fractured bones, the warrior in Randy trudged forward, suffering in silence.
You know, I was desperate to stay out on that field and not let injuries put me in the training room or sideline me and give somebody else an opportunity to get my position.
The excitement never stopped, and neither did the pain. The collisions on the football field can have a devastating effect on the body. Players can easily justify taking a handful of pain pills to stay in the game, to stay on the practice field, to stay out of the doctor's office, to keep from being replaced. Call it survival. Call it warrior mentality. Call it desperation. Call it anything but what it really is: addiction.
The injuries were getting worse and the addiction was getting worse. And I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop taking the pain medication on my own.
Randy took that suffer in silence mentality and those injuries with him when he left the game. And over the next 20+ years, continued to justify taking the handfuls of pills daily.
When I left the game, when I took that addiction into my retired life, when I didn't have the enablers around me or the ways to justify it, then that's when it really spiraled out of control.
I began to see, you know, his personality changing, the way he dealt with things. Of course, money was missing. He lost his job. We lost our home. You know, everything started just spiraling out of control.
I can't tell you how many things I had to lose, you know, how many relationships, how many homes, how many jobs, and I still couldn't stop. You know, as bad as my life was getting, I knew why. I just couldn't stop doing it.
On September 22nd, 2009, Randy flew from Houston to Fort Lauderdale and was driven an hour north to a West Palm Beach facility, where he fell out of the car and crawled on all fours the remaining 40 feet through the door, in full-blown withdrawal and sicker than humanly possible. Randy was broken and ready to surrender, desperate to get his life back.
People often ask me to describe the process that I went through that day. And the only way that I can do it is to say that over that 20+ years of addiction, God had plenty of opportunities to open the gates of heaven and let me in. What he chose to do was open the gates of hell and let me out.
And that's why Randy does what he does now, to help open the gate for someone else, giving back this gift of hope that was given to him.
If being a former professional athlete gets me in the door somewhere and helps somebody, helps saves a life or helps plant a seed in somebody, then that's what it was all about.
Helping others that are desperate, helping those that are broken, planting the seeds of recovery in the shattered guys that he played with and the guys that he played against, or anyone looking for a way out of that deep, dark pit of despair called addiction. Pain in life is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Randy chose not to suffer anymore. He made it. Many don't.
My greatest accomplishment was crawling in the door that night. It was the hardest thing that I ever did, and it was the most rewarding. This is such a great opportunity for us to continue to collaborate and work together and help these guys get their lives back, just like they helped me get my life back. This process works, guys. And like I said, it's a beautiful thing to watch. So thank you for having me, and thank you.
All right, guys. So thank you very much for that video. I'd like to officially introduce Randy Grimes. He is a 10-year veteran of the NFL, an addiction interventionist, and the founder of Professional Athletes in Recovery. He has partnered with the NFL Player Care Foundation, After the Impact Fund, Gridiron Greats, Motorsports Safety Group, Jockey Guild, and the Baseball Assistance Team to bring further awareness and treatment services to professional athletes, their families, and others. Randy is a regular contributor to the national media on the topics of addiction, recovery, and support for families affected by substance abuse. He has been featured in the New York Times, ESPN, CNN, Fox Sports, Fox News, MSNBC, SiriusXM Sports, and on the cover of Recovery Today magazine. He is also a critically acclaimed author and released his first book, Off Center, earlier this year. It is his riveting story of having it all, playing the sport he loved, losing almost everything, and ultimately finding redemption and hope. I can't thank Randy enough for being here with us today for our virtual webinar. Randy, thank you. I'll give it to you.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here through the magic of Zoom. And, you know, I always kind of start this off by saying, you know, I was a high school All-American. I was a college All-American in football. I was a second-round draft pick of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the 45th player selected in the 1983 draft. I was a Pro Bowler. I was a 1988 NFL Man of the Year for the Tampa Bay Bucks. And I was also the same guy who fell out of that car that night and crawled the last 40 feet through the door. And, you know, I still remember that old beat up, dirty black town car that picked me up at the airport that night. And, you know, I remember how dirty and stinky it was. And I realized about halfway up there that the reason it was like that, it was because it picked up people like me all the time, you know, people that were just at the very end of their rope. And I remember leaning against the car door and somebody opened it from the outside, and that's how I fell out and was on my all fours, and I just couldn't get up. And I crawled that last 30, 40 feet through the door. And, you know, nobody helped me, and I'm glad they didn't, because that's something that I needed to do myself, you know, and that was probably the hardest thing that I've ever done. But it was also my greatest achievement, you know, crawling through the door that night. And, you know, I remember, and I don't remember a lot about that night. I was so sick and so beat up, but I do remember hearing the words, Randy, in order to get this, you've got to have the desperation of a drowning man. And the reason that had such an impact on me, not only that night, but even today, is because my most vivid childhood memory, 8 years old, growing up right outside of Dallas, Texas, in Tyler, I remember I was out on the lake, and I was on one of those two-man paddle boat things all by myself. And I remember falling off of that thing and getting my feet caught up in something on the bottom of the lake, whether, I don't know, some kind of wire, chicken wire or something. And I remember how desperate I was to get back to the surface. I remember screaming underwater. I remember clawing at the water, fighting with every fiber in my body to get back to the surface, how desperate I was. And when I heard that night, I knew that I was in for the fight of my life. And listen, I think I'm a pretty tough guy. I've been in a lot of battles, and won most of them. You don't get to stay in the NFL for 10 years unless you're winning most of those battles. And, but crawling in the door that night was the toughest thing I ever did. And the best story that I've ever heard that kind of goes along with that was, everybody remembers Pat Summerall, right? Pat Summerall was a great friend of mine, a longtime New York Giant, longtime pitchman for CBS and Ace Hardware, all that stuff. Anyway, I'd gotten to be good friends with Pat while I was at Baylor. And also that friendship carried over into my professional career. I would see Pat at different places. But what you might not have known about Pat Summerall is that he was a longtime alcoholic. but he was also a man in long-term recovery. And we got together again right after I got sober back in 2010 down at the Super Bowl in Miami. And he told me a story. He told me a story about his neighbor back in Dallas, Texas, and how his neighbor was having, he was in organ failure. He needed a new liver. He was on his third marriage. His new wife was his new drinking buddy, and how things were just going completely out of control for his neighbor. So he felt like he needed to do something. So he got a group of guys together from his local home group, and they went and did a little intervention on him, a little 12-step call. And 90 days later, when Mickey Mantle was walking out of the Betty Ford Clinic, this is back in the early 80s, there was a crowd of people waiting for him outside. And Mickey could have gone out the back door. He had a car sitting there waiting for him. But he had something that he wanted to say to this crowd. And as he approached the crowd, somebody yelled out, "Hey, Mickey, what do you most want to be remembered for?" And, everybody was expecting some baseball related answer or some statistic or something like that. And Mickey walked up to that crowd and he said, "I want everybody to know that my greatest accomplishment in life was getting clean and sober." And that's how I felt that night when I crawled through that door. Because if I don't do that, that is my greatest accomplishment. If I don't do that, then everything else, all the football accolades, the marriage to my wife, the birth of my children, all of that was really for nothing if I don't crawl through the door that night. I was born and raised, like I said, right outside of Dallas, Texas. I had the greatest parents in the world. I never once saw them touch a drop of alcohol or anything like that. Brother and sister, the same way. They were older than me and the best role models in the world. The only real addiction we had in our family was a grandfather, my grandfather, who was an alcoholic for a while. And finally, when he started coming in drunk, he would pass out on the bed, and my grandmother would sew him up in a bed sheet and beat him with a broom handle. So he died sober. He actually got sober. And because of that little intervention with the broom handle and my grandmother, there's really no history of substance abuse in our family. There was no indication of what lied ahead for me. Football was something that came easy for me. And, our whole family centered around football. My father was a parole officer for the state of Texas, but really what he should have been was a coach, because that's where he started at. And my brother was a great player too, and went on and played at University of Southern Arkansas. And football just came easy for our family. It wasn't religion, but it was a close second, that's for sure. And the scouts started coming around. I was able to go anywhere and what it was back then, the Southwest Conference, but now it's the Big 12. And, I could have gone to Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Baylor, Rice, SMU, Arkansas, all these great schools I had the opportunity to go to, but I chose Baylor. I wanted to play for the great Grant Taft, and I had a sister that was already there. And, I met my wife the very first day, my freshman year at Baylor. And we went out that night and got married after our junior year. So I'm so glad that I picked Baylor just because of that. But again, football came easy for me, and I had a great college career. The scouts started coming around. I started thinking, wow, I might can make a living playing a game that I would gladly play for free. And I had a great senior year. I moved up in the draft all the way up to the top of the second round. And that was probably the 1983 draft was probably the greatest draft of all times. That was when all the great quarterbacks were selected that year. And there was a lot of great ball players that went on to be in the Hall of Fame and make the Pro Bowl and be all pro and everything else from that 1983 draft. But, I can still remember, now it's so much different, draft day. Now it's a big production, you know, on ESPN and the NFL Network, and they're flying guys in private jets from all over, and this huge production. And back then, though, in '83, it was just me and my wife sitting by a telephone in our one-bedroom efficiency on the campus of Baylor University, waiting for the phone to ring. And I can still remember getting that phone call from Coach John McKay. And, you know, I picked up the phone and all I could hear was his old cigar-stained, raspy voice saying, "Hey, Randy, you know, we just drafted you in the second. Well, I'll see you tomorrow." Click. And I was like, whoa, wait, Coach, where's Tampa? I didn't even know where that was. But we were so excited, you know, because Tampa was a playoff team in 1982. So I thought that I was going to a playoff contender. Little did I know what the next 10 years were going to hold. So, you know, we were so excited. We packed up everything that we owned, which wasn't much, into a small little U-Haul and hooked it up to our burgundy Cutlass Supreme. And out I-10 East, we went to Tampa from Waco, Texas. And, you know, going to start our lives together, my career in pro football, and really our family. And again, there was no indication at all of what lied ahead for me. You know, I got to Tampa and I had a locker. This is before the season ever even started, my rookie year. This is when I first got there. We were still in mini camp. And, you know, I had a locker next to the great Leroy Selman. And if you don't know who Leroy Selman is, look him up. He was probably one of the greatest defensive linemen to ever play the game out of Oklahoma. He was Tampa Bay's first ever draft pick in 1976. He was a legend in the NFL and pretty much anywhere that he went. And he was just such a great man. He taught me so much about being a professional football player and being a pro, not only on the field, but off the field. And, you know, the first thing I learned, I remember sitting next to him and just being in awe that here I am dressing next to one of those great players that I had been watching for years on TV back in college and in high school, you know, watching, you know, like I watched Roger Staubach or some of the great Dallas Cowboy teams that came up, you know, watching these heroes of mine. And now I was dressing right next to one of them. And, you know, it just blew my mind that this was all real. And, you know, one of the first things I ever learned from Leroy was that you do whatever you have to. Well, the first thing I learned from Leroy was football was no longer a game. Now it was a job. And the second thing that I learned from Leroy was you do whatever you have to stay out on that field, because if you're not out there in your position, somebody else was going to be, and you didn't want to give them that opportunity. So, you know, I'm sure Leroy didn't mean taking handfuls of pain pills every day and taking handfuls of sleeping pills every night to get to sleep. But that's what I was willing to do to be the best player that I could be. I was willing to do whatever I had to stay out on that field. And, you know, I played back in an era where, you know, we used to beat the heck out of each other all week long. You know, I call it that junction boy mentality, that Bear Bryant mentality where, you know, coaches used to think if you don't practice hard, you're not going to play hard. And, you know, I never understood that mentality, but obviously I had to do it if I wanted to play. And, you know, a lot of the injuries that we received back then was during practice. And, you know, it never made any sense to me, but there was nothing I could do to stop it. That was the mentality. So there was a lot of injuries that came up, a lot of nicks and different things that would make you hobble out of there. And you know, I was not going to get that reputation of always being back in the training room or always in line to see the doctor or always being worked on by one of the trainers or always on the missing practice list. I was not going to get that reputation because that was a reputation you were sure to never get away from in what was going to be a short NFL career for that person. So I was not willing to do that. So these are ways that I justified what I called a necessary evil. And that's the way I looked at it. It was a necessary evil to feed my family, to be the best center that ever played the game, to be a Pro Bowler, or to be all pro, or to get that next big contract. You know, these are ways that I justified throwing down that handful of pain pills every day and that handful of benzos every night to get to sleep. And, you know, not once in the 8.5 years that this was going on, nearly 9 years, not once did anybody ever come up to me and say, Randy, why are you slurring your words? Or Randy, why are you nodding off in meetings? Or Randy, why are you late to practice every day? Or Randy, why are you the last to leave the building every night and pills are missing out of the drug safe? Nobody ever asked me those questions because I was always playing good. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We had a drug safe that was right in the middle of our training room, and it was full of narcotics, and it was never locked. So if I didn't get it from the team doctor, and you know, that was another way that I justified it, the fact that I was getting it from the team doctors, so it must be okay, or I'm getting it from the team trainers, so it must be, that must be what they do in the NFL, right? Or I'm getting it from teammates, you know, or fans that are right outside the door. You know, those are other ways that I justified it, because I'm getting it from the doctors, from the medical staff. And we had that drug safe that was right in the middle of the training room that was always open. It was full of narcotics, and you could just go get whatever you wanted to out of there. That was the culture back then, you know, you know, not once did anybody ever question the fact that, you know, I was taking so much medication out of that drug safe. If it was ever accidentally locked, we had 3 white guys that started on defense, and their jersey numbers were the combination to that safe the whole 10 years that I was there. It never changed. But, you know, those are ways that I justified what I still called a necessary evil, you know, and I just figured, you know, that's the way it is in the NFL. You know, everybody knows what's going on. There were other guys that were doing it. So I just figured that that was the culture. I mean, what other occupation in the world would hand you, as you're leaving the stadium after a game, as you're walking out the door, what other occupation in the world would have a trainer or a manager standing there handing you a little white envelope with 2 Percocets in there, 2 Xanax in there, and 2 beers as you're walking out to your car to meet your family after the game with your keys in your hand? So what other occupation would do that, you know, besides the NFL? But that was the culture back then. You know, flying back home on airplanes after road trips, the manager or trainer would come down the aisle handing out the same cocktail of, you know, 2 pills, 2 Percocets, 2 Xanax, and 2 beers to everybody that wanted it. Of course, everybody's hands went up. You know, that was the culture back then. So that's how it all started. That's how I justified it for so long. And, you know, it progressed. That necessary evil progressed to the point to where, you know, the last 2 years of my career, I was taking so many pain pills and so many benzodiazepines before the game that I was playing games in complete blackouts. You know, I would be home at night, 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, after playing a 1 o'clock football game somewhere in the country that day or at home. And I would start coming around and you know, I would be all scratched up and beat up and fingernails all torn up and dehydrated and everything that you are after an NFL football game that I had played every down in. And I didn't remember any of it. Not any of it. And I was the center. I was the quarterback of the offensive line. I was getting guys going in the right direction. I was changing blocking schemes at the line of scrimmage. You know, I was making audibles. I was listening to the quarterback behind me to audible. I was listening for the snap count. So I was center, hike the ball on the appropriate count. I was doing all of this in a complete blackout, and that's what that necessary evil progressed to. And, you know, not once did anybody ever say, Randy, what's going on? You know, why, you know, I'd have to wait till the next day and watch it on film with everybody else to see how I played that day before. And I always played good. And again, it just went on for another week. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? That was the culture back then. You know, I played for 5 different head coaches. I played, and this is in the 10 years that I was there, okay? I played for 5 different head coaches. I had 6 different position coaches, offensive line coaches. I had 10 or 12 different quarterbacks that got up underneath me in that career, and probably 4 different general managers in those 10 years. I mean, Tampa Bay in the 80s and early 90s was a revolving door of not only players and coaches and front office people, but pretty much everybody that came through that organization. It was a revolving door. And the one consistent thing about the Bucs in the early 80s and early 90s was Randy Grimes at center. I seemed to survive every coaching change, every front office change, every quarterback change, and I seemed to survive those things. And after that last year, 1992, after that last game of the 1992 season, and back then, if you weren't going to the playoffs after your last game, you would come in on the Monday after that Sunday game. You'd watch the film with your coach from the day before. You'd have an exit meeting with your coach for how you played the whole year, and you would pretty much clean out your locker, and you would leave until the next spring. You know, nowadays it's more of a year-round job, and guys are there working and training the whole year. But back then, after that last game, you would pretty much leave town. And for me, I would always move back to Houston and spend my off season in Houston. But that's how it was back then. And I remember after this particular game, 1992, and I remember standing at my locker, and we had finished the season. I was just fixing to clean it out. And as I was facing the locker, I had a door right next to my locker that exited the locker room. And, you know, it had one of those big silver bars in the middle of it, a big wooden door with a silver bar, and, you know, you hit it to go. And I was standing there looking at my locker, and I felt the breeze of somebody walking behind me. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I heard the words, Randy, we won't be needing your services here in Tampa anymore. And as I turned to look at who said that, all I could see was the back of Sam Weish, my last head coach, hitting that silver bar in the middle of that wooden door and exiting the locker room. Not even slowing down long enough to look me in the eye and tell me that I'm no longer welcome on the team. You know, it took me a long time to get over that. I remember thinking, wow, that's how it ends. You know, that's how it ends. All the blood, sweat, and tears that I've left on football fields all over this country. And that's how it ends. And not that I expected to have an expressway named after me or a big parade or a party or anything like that. But I guess I just never expected it to end like that. You know, a coach that I've only had for a year, who's not loyal to me, I'm not loyal to him. And he doesn't even slow down long enough to look me in the eye and tell me like a man that I'm cut, that I'm not welcome anymore there. And I'd had an injury that year, halfway through the year. So I knew I couldn't go try out for anybody else. So when I heard those words, I knew it was over. And, you know, I just kind of raked everything out of my locker into a black trash bag and walked out the back door. And Randy Grimes, the football player, didn't exist anymore. And the reason I tell that story is because, you know, I already had this raging necessary evil going on that was really a full-blown addiction, okay? And now you throw in the fact that I don't have that uniform to put on anymore, that I don't have that playbook to look at anymore, that I don't have that itinerary to go by anymore. That was just throwing gas on an already raging dumpster fire. That was my addiction. And I struggled for a long time. That transitional trauma is what I call it, you know, and I still deal with it a lot with the players that I worked with. You know, I struggled with that for a long time, trying to find out who I was. How do I contribute? You know, how do I be a husband or a father or an employee, because or anything, you know, because I had allowed football to become who I was instead of just something that I was good at. And I struggled for a long time. You know, the injuries just kept getting worse. The chronic pain just kept getting worse. Therefore, new ways to justify that necessary evil just kept getting worse. My tolerance to the medications just kept getting higher. So I needed more and more all the time. And, you know, doctor shopping all over Houston, Texas was pretty much my full-time job for the next 20 plus years because I couldn't stop the insanity, you know, and I always found ways to justify it, you know, and even though I was losing everything and I had some great jobs and I lost them all because of the addiction. I had some great friends and relationships and lost them all because of the addiction. I had some great homes and cars and lost them all because of the addiction. You know, I had a wife that loved me unbelievably, you know, the greatest thing that ever happened to me, until she realized she was loving me to death and had to take a step back. And I had 2 kids that loved me unconditionally until they couldn't stand me anymore because of the addiction. You know, the new normal in my life was ambulance rides and hospital stays and detoxes and seizures and like I said, lost cars and lost houses and lost jobs. And like I said, I couldn't control the chaos. I couldn't stop the chaos. And the perfect storm was coming together in the spring and summer of 2009. I had a great friend that I played next to named Tom McHale for many years in Tampa Bay. He was my right guard. We played next to each other for a long time. We were great friends. And one morning during that spring of 2009, you know, Tom just didn't wake up. And he was doing the same thing I was doing, and that was self-medicating his injuries that he got while he played with the Bucs with opiates and benzos. And one morning, he just didn't wake up, and that got my attention. That really got my attention. The fact that my wife realized she was loving me to death, that she had to take a step back, meaning that she had to move out. And she moved in with her parents just to get away from me, she couldn't stand to see me continue to kill myself every day. She just couldn't sit by and watch it. My daughter wouldn't let me come around my first grandchild because I wasn't fit to be around her new baby. The fact that I was having seizures as a result of benzo withdrawal. You know, here's how insane it got, that I would drive all over Houston, Texas, looking for more benzos so I wouldn't have a seizure, knowing that I could have a seizure at any second driving that car. And it was only by the grace of God that I never hurt anybody or myself. And but that was how insane it got there at the end. And you know, that's finally when I put up my hand and asked for help. I can remember the last house that we lost, and this was right before I went into treatment. And I remember laying in the floor of that house. The new owners weren't going to take possession of it for another 60 days. So we went ahead and moved all the furniture out of it, cut the utilities off. And, you know, I can remember laying in the floor of that house. And by now, my wife has already left. My children are out of the house. They're in college. My daughter's having her first baby. You know, and I'm laying in the floor of this dark house with no utilities, no car, no job, no money. And that was the first time I remember saying how I started this talk off. I remember laying in the floor thinking, you know, I was a college All-American. I was a Pro Bowler. I was a 1988 NFL Man of the Year. I was going through all these accolades that I'd gotten in football and with my marriage and the birth of my kids. And here I am laying in the floor of this vacant house with no utilities, no car, no job, no money, no nothing. And that's when I put up my hand and asked for help. And my wife was willing to make one more call for me. You know, she was so tired of the I'm sorry's or me deflecting it back on her and telling her how crazy she was and how she was blowing it out of proportion. You know, all the crap that we do as addicts, you know, to anything to deflect the attention off us. She was so tired of me doing that she was willing to make one more phone call for me. And whoever she talked to that day up at the NFL offices in New York on Park Avenue, you know, back then the NFL didn't have anything out there for mental health or substance abuse for former players. But whoever she talked to that day knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. And that's how I got on that airplane. That was September 22nd of 2009. That's when that black town car picked me up. And that's when I crawled into treatment. And, you know, I came into that with, I was finally desperate. You know, I finally had that urgency about me, but it was more about surrender. I finally surrendered, and I finally had that desperation to listen to what others had done who have been successful with this. I was desperate to get my life back. You know, I was desperate to fix all the damage that I created back in Houston with my reputation and my marriage and my friends and my family and all of that. I was desperate to get all that back and to fix it. And I remember I came into treatment for 90 days, and I came in with a plan. I was going to come in, I was going to detox, and not a lot of people wanted to take me as a result of all the seizures that I was having. But this one place did, and I came in with a plan, and I was going to detox off all these medications that I was abusing. And then I was going to go off and have a knee replaced while I was in treatment. I was going to have my right knee replaced. I was going to have my surgery on my left knee, and I was going to have some neck surgery, and I was going to do it all at the same time. And then I was going to come back, detox off those hospital meds that they gave me. And then I was going to go off for the next 60 days and work on those underlying issues that made Randy do what Randy did. And I remember that first 2 weeks, right before I was going off to have that knee replaced, during that first detox, I can remember sitting at a picnic table there on the campus of the treatment center. And for some reason, I would get up every morning and just write. I had a spiral notebook, and I don't know why, I'm not a big writer, but it made me feel better to just get up and kind of write everything that was going on around me, what was happening to me, how I was feeling, you know, and this particular morning, as I was sitting there, and it was at 8:45 in the morning, I'll never forget it. It's like it was yesterday. I was sobbing uncontrollably. I was sitting at this table, sobbing uncontrollably, and it's I can't imagine what a 295-pound man sobbing at a picnic table in the middle of a rehab campus looks like, but that was me. I couldn't get a grip on myself. I could not get myself under control, because for the first time in 20 plus years, I was having to deal with life on life's terms, sober, you know, and all the huge wake of destruction that I'd left back in Houston with my life, and with my, like I said, my marriage and my finances and my reputation and my family. It's just was overwhelming. And it was, as all this was going on and I was sobbing uncontrollably at this picnic table, it was like somebody came up behind me while all this is going on. It was like somebody came up behind me and draped this warm quilt around my shoulders. And I say quilt because I remember feeling weight and warmth on my shoulders and on my neck. And I remember having this overwhelming sense of confidence that not only could I do this, because up until then, I didn't think I could do it. I did not think I could complete this, but I had this overwhelming confidence that not only could I complete this and finish it, but that I had to make it mean something. And, you know, that was kind of the birth of Pro Athletes in Recovery. Of course, I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. And I had so much work to do on myself first, but I knew I wanted to give it back. I knew that I wanted to give away everything that I was going to get. And I knew that I wanted to make it mean something. And I did. I went off and had the knee replaced. I had the surgery on the other knee. I had the neck surgery. I came back. I detoxed for another week off those hospital meds. And then I went off and I worked on that 60 days on Randy Grimes. And I worked on the fact, you know what I did? I finally grieved the death of Randy Grimes, the football player. And even though it was 20 plus years later, and even though that was a real thing, and I held on to it for so long, you know, the fact that I had identified myself with that uniform, with the fact that I was an NFL football player, the fact that that's how I fed my family, and that's how I stroked my ego and all that. Those are things that I had to deal with, and that loss of identity and everything that goes along with that. That's what I worked on that 60 days. And I tell you, I did everything that they asked me to do. I still had that gift of desperation, even when that door hit me in the rear end after 90 days. And, you know, they asked me if I wanted to be successful. They told me that I should move into a sober living facility. And even though I had a family back in Houston, I listened to their advice, and I moved into a sober living facility. And here I was, 49 years old, former NFL football player, moving into a sober living house with a bunch of 20-something-year-old kids out of the Northeast. But I was still desperate, and I was still willing to do whatever I had to, and anything that wasn't my plan, because my best plans got me there. And I did that. And, you know, they would let me come back onto campus. They would let me come back onto the treatment center, even though I'd been discharged and I wasn't a patient anymore. They would let me come back onto the campus every day because it was my safe place. And because I needed them to see my eyes and hear my voice for a long time, I needed that accountability. I especially as a former athlete, I thrived on that accountability. And I would just come back on that campus every day and pick up cigarette butts. I would just walk around that campus picking up cigarette butts anything to stay around my safe people. And I did that for another 6 months after the whole time that I was living in that sober living. And, I eventually started doing some things with their alumni department. And after a year of sobriety, I started doing some work for them in marketing, but also I started with the NFL. And, I knew that there was a bunch of guys out there that I'd played with and against who were struggling in silence, just like I was, and usually it was because of pride, ego, guilt, shame, whatever it was. There was a lot of guys out there that were doing the same thing I was doing, and for whatever reason wouldn't put up their hand and ask for help. And usually it was because they didn't think there was any resources available. So I went to the NFL, I went to the Player Care Foundation. We started what's called now the Player Care Foundation. And we started reaching out to these guys, and I started going out and sharing my story and letting these guys know that they weren't alone, that there was other people just like them that were struggling, that warrior mentality, and that they didn't have to do that anymore, that there were resources available. And, over the last 10, 11 years, I've been able to help hundreds and hundreds of former players and family members, and not only just former NFL players, but also, Major League Baseball got involved with it, and the NBA and the NHL, and pretty much any sport that you can think of that has an organization that supports their former players. That's who I was working with, and that's who I was going out and sharing my story with their former players, and whether it was jockeys or MMA fighters or golfers or tennis players or pretty much anybody out there. I've had the opportunity to work with these guys over the last 10, 11 years. And, it's kind of God's way of keeping me connected to a game that I love so much, and working with people that I love so much. And I don't just work with athletes, I work with everybody. And it's just a privilege. I learned a long time ago and early in my recovery that in order to keep what you've got to give it away. And that's kind of been my motto as I go out and I work with these players, because I need to let them know that it's okay to not be okay, but you've got to raise your hand and ask for help. People ask me all the time what I miss most about football. And, believe it or not, it's not being out on that field. It's not being between the bleachers and under the lights and all that. I miss the locker room. I miss being with like-minded people who have been to those deep, dark places that I've been to, who I've laughed and cried and suffered and bled with, and that's what recovery has given me back, is the opportunity to be with like-minded people who have been to the places that I've been. And I'm so grateful for that. We are in a pandemic within a pandemic. And, I say all the time that we're losing an entire generation of kids right in front of our eyes. They say that 110,000 people will overdose this year, when really, the word out there is that that's the most underreported number there is, and that it's going to be closer to 200,000. I mean, it's a leading cause of death for people 18 to 45. And, I used to be the captain of the Buccaneers for the 8 years that I was there. I was there 10 years, but 8 of those years I was the captain. And I would go out at midfield before the game for the coin toss. And I can remember standing at midfield and we weren't a great team, but our fans supported us, and they came out and they sold out that stadium every Sunday. I guess it was a great place to come and take your shirt off and drink beer, but they were always there. They were loyal. They were faithful. And, I can remember standing at midfield during the coin toss and just looking around at what 78,000 people looks like, all in one place at one time. And it's such an awesome view from down there. And, that's 78,000, that doesn't even touch the number of people that's going to overdose this year as a result of everything that's going on out there with the fentanyl and the, you know, we're a country that self-medicates. You know, that's our first response to everything, is doctors throwing scripts at it, or us wanting to numb up and not feel, whether it's with alcohol or opiates or whatever your drug of choice is. It's not your drug of choice. It's the fact that you don't want to feel. You don't want to face life on life's terms. And that's what I ran from for so long. And, you know, we're a country that does that. And the good thing about what's going on now in the recovery world is that there's more and more people that are recovering out loud. You know, they're by recovering out loud, by telling your story, by knowing that it's okay to not be okay, by raising your hand and asking for help. You know, it tears down that stigma that's associated with addiction. And that is so huge. I mean, that's what we do every day. That's what's so good about events like this, where we all come together and we talk about this, because look, we're not going to arrest our way out of this. We're not going to legislate our way out of it, but we can educate our way out of it. And that's what events like this is for. And it tears down that stigma that keeps families from asking for help, that keeps people that are struggling with addiction or suffering in silence from asking for help. That's what these events do. And I'm just so grateful to be in the middle of that, to be down in the trenches, to be out in the open and sharing my story with anybody that'll listen, because, you know, it's so easy for families to say, no, not my kid, you know, no, not in my backyard, or schools to say, no, it's not happening in our school, when, yeah, it is your kid. It is happening in your backyard. It is happening in your school. It's everywhere. It's in every community. And no matter where I go and speak and ask people who in the crowd has been affected by addiction, every hand goes up, because this is such a family disease and it affects everybody. You know, I in my crazy brain, especially because I live here in St. Petersburg and I'm always looking out for them, but I think of jellyfish. You know, I think of addiction like jellyfish. You know, you've got this ugly mass up on top of the water, but then you have all these tentacles underneath the water, and they just are going out trying to sting everybody that comes in contact with them, or everything that's close to them. And, you know, that's kind of how I look at addiction, and how it's such a family disease, and how it affects everybody, you know, friends, neighbors, employees, everybody that you come in contact with. It's just such an ugly disease, like that jellyfish. And, you know, I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be in front of you guys today, for you taking the time to listen to me. And, you know, I've got a story, and probably we all have a lot of stories, and all of them are bestsellers. When I wrote the book Off Center, the whole point of that book was to be a platform for the Grimes family to heal. You know, my wife and my daughter and my son and my mom and my brother and my sister and my wife's family, they all had a platform in the book. And I didn't really care if I sold a copy or not. I just wanted us all to come together, share our stories of what they went through with my addiction, get it down on paper for others to read, so other families would know that they're not the only ones going through this, and that it happens to good people. You know, addiction is the great equalizer, I always say, whether you're a former NFL football player or somebody out there working 9 to 5 every day as hard as they can. It's the great equalizer. It brings us all to the same place. And I'm so proud of what the book has been able to do. It was released out at the Super Bowl last February, and I'm so proud of what it's been able to accomplish. And you know, the platform, it actually served its purpose. It actually did what I hoped it would do, and that was heal our family and give everybody a platform. And this is 13 years later, or 12 and a half years later, actually. Oh, no, 12 years later that we started this. I've been sober for a little over 13. And we started this back about 12 years ago. I mean, into my 12th year. And it served its purpose. Everybody was able to be a part of it. Everybody was able to share honestly what they went through and what it was like for them and how it affected them. And so I hope that you read it. I hope you like the format that I wrote it in. Me and my wife have had the privilege of doing hundreds of interventions all over the country. And who'd have thought that, right? You know, that me and my wife would someday be doing interventions together, you know, after everything that I put them through. But we've had the opportunity to do hundreds of interventions, and we took bits and pieces out of a lot of those interventions and put it into one intervention. And that story parallels my story throughout the book. So I hope you like the format that I wrote it in. And I think there's something in there for everybody. There's that angry person. There's that codependent person. There's that person who is the enabler. You know, there's that you know, there's that wife who just can't seem to do enough, who thinks she can love her spouse back to sobriety. There's something in there for everybody. So I hope you get a chance to read it. I hope you get a chance to leave me a review on Amazon. Apparently Amazon really likes those reviews. And but the main thing is I'm grateful to be here today to share my story, to continue to tear down that stigma, that huge wall of stigma that goes not only with addiction, but with mental health as well. And you know, I'm grateful for what I do today. I'm grateful that God allows me to, like I said, stay connected to a game that I just love so much and that I would have gladly played for free all those years. So thank you for listening. I hope I didn't go too long for y'all.
Well, thank you, Randy. Greatly appreciate that. Was just an amazing testimonial and story, and I think that will definitely you know, give a lot of people strength and hope, you know, for themselves and for family members, that you know, this can, you know, that they can, you know, use your information, your strong testimonial, and then use that to help, you know, their own situation. So let's go right into the questions and answers here, or questions. So we'll start from the beginning here. Randy, do you feel the NFL today is more involved with the players as it relates to substance misuse?
I think that there is more accountability now than there was 13 years ago when I started this, okay? And when I say that, I still work with athletes that have recently retired, and they tell me what's going on in the training room as far as handing out narcotics. I know that the DEA is more in tune with what's going on. I don't know if you remember some years ago, visiting doctors could not prescribe narcotics when they were in another state. You know, like the Tampa Bay team doctor could not prescribe narcotics to a Tampa Bay player if they were in Seattle or Chicago or somewhere. So we were able to get that pulled off, but there's a more accountability as far as prescribing off label the way they used to, meaning that they would just pour it out of the jar that it came from and from the factory. And so there's some things that we've accomplished, but listen, Dave, that warrior mentality is still there. Guys still put pressure on themselves to get back out on that field as quick as they can because they don't want somebody taking their job. And, you know, team owners put pressure on the medical staff to get players back out there probably sooner than they should. So all that pressure still exists, but usually it's from the player himself that's putting the most of the pressure on there. And there's guys out there that are obviously still willing to do whatever they have to stay out on that field. And, you know, we justify it so easy because we want to feed our family and we want to play forever and get that next contract. You know, it's insanity.
Yeah. And I know we mentioned this before when we talked, but the Tyler Skaggs, unfortunately, he overdosed. He was a Major League Baseball player, and there was a lot of it's been in the press. The person was convicted that gave him the drugs. What do you think about that? Is that something, I'm assuming that's good to have this somebody now facing consequences for what they've done?
Right. And, you know, that's probably been going on for a long time, and not just with the Tyler Skaggs situation, but, you know, throughout the league. And, you know, substance abuse is out there. It's going to affect it. Just because you're a professional athlete doesn't mean that you're immune to anything that's going on out there. And matter of fact, you have more pressures and more injuries and more chronic pain and more of a reason to justify taking that. But, you know, there's always going to be people that are willing to do anything for a player, you know, and get them whatever they want. And it's so sad that happened. And that's not the only case out there. You know, that was just the one that got the most media coverage, and for good reason too. But I'm glad how it worked out. I'm glad somebody's going to be accountable for it. And but it's still going on out there at other levels, at other sports, you know, around the country. And that's our job, is to continue to stay on top of it and let guys know that it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah. What would you do different if you had an opportunity to do it all over again?
You know, I've been asked that before, and I don't know what I would do different. Obviously, you know, I didn't even look at it until I was playing those games in blackouts the last 2 years of my career, until I had that seizure on the beach my last year in the pros. I didn't look at it like a problem. You know, I was still justifying it pretty good until I started playing in those last couple of years. Obviously, I'd like to go back and see if I could do it without the medication. You know, I would like to go back and change some of the consequences of the medicine. And, you know, I would have certainly, I never really thought that I would take that addiction into my private life. You know, I never thought about retirement and thought about the injuries that were going to still be with me, and the chronic pain was just going to get worse, and the depression and the things that went along with not having that identity of a football player. I wish I could have gone back and been more prepared for that. You know, you think you're prepared, but until somebody actually puts that hand on your shoulder and says those words, and it's for real, you're not really prepared. And I would have liked to have been more prepared, and that's on me. You know, I should have been prepared for that.
Well, the next question is asking about the culture of, you know, the NFL, and has it changed over the years? And, you know, is it on you, or should the NFL be preparing their players, you know, more for after retirement? You know, is that culture getting to that point where they're helping, you know?
Well, I think the kind of athletes that are coming into the league now, they're coming in, they're so entitled, you know, coming in from college level, and a college level that, is comparably as good as the pros as far as facilities and everything else from these big D1 schools and what they have to do now to recruit the best athletes. So it's a different breed of athlete that's coming in there. And guys are still coming in thinking that they're going to play forever. And not only that they're going to play forever, but that the money is going to last forever. And even though they're making, just unbelievable amounts of money at all levels and all sports. I mean, it's changed quite a bit since the 80s back when I played. But the fact that they're able to accumulate so much money, they're also able to lose as much money. And, the more you make, the more you spend is what they say. And I think the NFL could do a better job of preparing these guys to leave. But, guys don't ever think they're going to leave. They think that if they get cut here, they're going to go to the next team and get on. And it's not really a reality to them until that phone stops ringing and their bank accounts are starting to dry up. And there are some programs out there that the NFL is trying to do, that the NFL Players Association is trying to do. I talk to guys a lot around the league as far as that transitional trauma, preparing them to not have the uniform anymore. But that's from a substance abuse, mental health point of view. And a lot of guys won't even admit that there is a problem there. So, they have put therapists in every clubhouse, which is a good thing. It looks good on paper, but players don't want to be seen knocking on that door. Or they don't want to be seen eating in the lunchroom with that person. They don't want anybody to know what's going on with them. So, it's good and it's bad, but at least they're making some efforts towards trying to get better and trying to help these guys and trying to prepare them for life after football or whatever sport it is.
So it sounds like maybe there is a positive change in the culture, from what you're saying. So that's good. What advice would you give a young player today, wanting to play in the NFL? Let's say a high schooler versus a college player. What kind of advice would you give them to maybe avoid, things that you have had to deal with?
Well, I would first let them know how hard it is to get to the NFL. And the percentage of guys that actually make it out of high school, that make it to college, that play through college and make it to the NFL, who are drafted in a position to where a club is going to keep them, and that's a very low percentage of people. So obviously I've got to let them know what those odds are first that they're going to get there. But if they're willing to do the work and to go out there and to do everything that's going to be necessary to get to that next level, the first thing I would let them know is that it's okay to not be okay. I'm still pushing that through, but I would warn guys about steroids, and that the easy way to get from point A to point B is not always the best way. And steroids, although they might not be physically addicting, mentally they definitely are addicting. And it's all part of that process. And there's going to be injuries, and that you need to know that there's non-narcotic ways of dealing with those injuries now. And, there wasn't a lot of those procedures out there back when I was coming through. I mean, we had Whirlpool and we had ice and we had stem and, we had all those kind of things. But even now, there's so many different procedures for helping with chronic pain and helping guys get over injuries and getting them back faster than they did back when I played. So that's my message too, is to give that an opportunity. Non-narcotic ways of dealing with chronic pain, and really when I'm dealing with these athletes, even today after their career, I try to tell them, I try to show them, and we show them here at the treatment center that I'm at White Sands Treatment Center. I show them that there's non-narcotic ways to deal with all that, but you got to give it a chance. You got to be open-minded and give it a chance to work. And it does.
Well, that's very good advice. That's great advice, especially coming from you. So another question here is, what was your favorite moment in the NFL? And I think it's a two-part question. What was your favorite moment in the NFL, and what is your favorite thing to do now?
Yeah. Well, and I told you we weren't a great team. You know, my best record was 6-10 over that course of that whole 10 years. And you know, I had, like I said, I had a lot of head coaches, but I had a lot of great players that came through there. And you know, spending time in the locker room with those guys, I wish that I could say that it was, you know, an overtime win at the Super Bowl, or an overtime win to get in the Super Bowl from the playoffs. But I never experienced those. I mean, we had some great games. We won some great games. I played against some great players, from Randy White to Reggie White to all kinds of great Joe Klecko and Jim Burt. Some of those great defensive linemen that played back in the 80s and early 90s that are now in the Hall of Fame. You know, I had the opportunity to play against those guys, but just hanging out in the locker room with my guys, you know, that's what I remember the most about my time there. That was the funnest. You know, that was when everybody got together, and that's when we were all friends, and that's when, you know, you were with a brotherhood. You knew you were with a brotherhood then. And so that was obviously my best memories coming out of the pros, and that's what I long for the most. And what was the second part of that?
What do you enjoy doing now? The most?
I'm a beach guy now. I live here on the beach. My motto is, if you can't tone it, tan it. So I stay on the beach because tan fat looks so much better than white fat.
Yeah.
And no, I'm grateful that I'm here now. I'm grateful that I'm able to live here near the beach and continue to do what I do, and that's help people with mental health and substance abuse.
Yeah, we love your testimony. And there's a few more questions. What advice do you have for today's youth and young adults in sports? I think we kind of already had that. That was kind of, you know, what advice? I think that was kind of.
Yeah, but let me say also about that. You know, I encourage parents to have that uncomfortable conversation with their children about what they're doing, what's going on around them, what they're seeing out there in their schools and their sports. You know, I want parents to get more involved with their kids, especially their sports, and what they're doing and who they're hanging out with, and what's being said to them by coaches and everything else. You know, I want parents to be more involved and to have those uncomfortable conversations, whether it's something sports related, something steroid related, or drug related, or just, you know, things mental health related stuff that parents need to be aware of. I find that parents are so disconnected now, and a lot of times it's because they don't want to have that uncomfortable conversation, or they want to be friends with their kids instead of parents. And, you know, I was probably guilty of it when I was raising my kids, but that's what I see out there. And I encourage parents to just stay on top of, especially in this age of this digital age of where kids are constantly on their phones or their iPads or gaming. You know, there's just so much going on out there that they need to stay plugged into.
Wonderful. Great advice. Do you believe the NFL has become more cognizant of players with substance abuse?
I think that the NFL will acknowledge things that make the NFL look better. You know, you're not going to hear a lot about substance abuse. You're not going to hear a lot about concussions. You know, you're going to hear about some of the great things that they're doing and the different protocols that they have, but you're never going to hear statistics, because that's going to always make them look guilty. So, or look like they had a part in it, and that's never going to happen. So I think the NFL has a long way to go. Hopefully there's enough of us out there, like I said, recovering out loud, letting the clubs know that this is still going on, that we're right there advocating for those players and future players. And we're not going to let it continue to keep happening to guys. Guys are not going to keep leaving the game addicted to narcotics and as a result of what started while they played the game.
What are some of the programs or prevention opportunities are there for, football players or athletes today, you would say?
Pretty much anything they want to get involved with. I know through my organization, Pro Athletes in Recovery, we focus a lot on aftercare. That's the most important part for us. We know we can do treatment. We know that we know the benefits of inpatient treatment, but it's the aftercare that we find is the most overlooked piece of this puzzle. So, there's a lot of opportunities there within our organization. I know that these organizations that I work with, like BAT, Baseball Assistance Team, the Motorsport Safety Group with race car drivers, I know with the Jockeys Guild, with jockeys, they all have their own programs that we work with that educate these future people coming out of their sport. And, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of jockeys, and I got to tell you, man, those guys are beat up more than football players. They're only about that big to start with.
Mm-hmm.
And, the way they fall off those horses, and horses turn over on them in gates, and the way that their heads are all the time when they're riding, those guys are incredible. And they're so tough, but they're so beat up, and they have such eating disorders and other underlying things going on because, it's easy to replace them. It's hard to replace the horse, but it's easy to replace the rider. And they're also a population that is willing to do whatever they have to, and they'll just suffer in silence and won't say a word, anything to keep that horse. And that's so prevalent with all the other sports. They are not going to guys are not going to let somebody else get in their position.
Yeah, because they'll lose their job.
They'll lose their job.
Wow. What kind of information or education do you wish was available to you as an athlete?
Well, obviously, I would have liked to. The FBI would come in every year, and they would talk to us about gambling. They had their usual once a year trip where they would come in, and they would talk to every team about gambling and of course street drugs like cocaine and marijuana. And they didn't even mention heroin back then. That was like, who's going to do heroin? Well, there probably wouldn't have been a lot of guys that did heroin if they'd known about it. But, they would come in and they would talk about that. And so, but now they do a better job of including a lot of the pharmaceutical drugs that guys are abusing, whether it's opiates or benzos, Xanax and the different benzos that are out there. But also, the NFL is on the verge of they're really flirting with danger here when they talk about legalizing the marijuana and the consequences for having a dirty drug test as a result of marijuana, because this is not the same marijuana that was out there 10 years ago or 20 years ago. This stuff is genetically engineered. It's very potent. That. And, it's a different thing that's going on out there now with the marijuana. So, especially if there's an underlying mental health issue going on, that's just going to exacerbate it and make it worse. So, I think they could do a better job of preparing guys for, they could even do a better job of having a program that guys are mandated to participate in. And that's what I would like to see.
Yeah, or anonymous. Do they have an anonymous program now where people can, for physicians, and nurses, I know in the healthcare field, you can, there's anonymous type treatment that you can get by the state. Does the NFL do anything like that?
No, they don't. But what you can do is you can prepare, or you can set up an off-site visit with that health professional that I said they were putting in every clubhouse.
Yeah.
So, where you don't have to be seen knocking on his door, or you don't have to be seen eating with him at the lunch table. You can actually go to another office off-site somewhere.
Okay.
And, it's like an EAP technically. And, everything is confidential. And, I don't deal a lot with current players because every team has their own protocols as far as somebody would test dirty for, and really you've got 3 different tests before anything ever happens. You can test dirty 3 times. And by then, you could be way long gone, by the time you give them a 3rd drug test. So, that's why I want to catch them early. That's why I want to help guys that are testing positive early. But I don't do a lot with current players. I focus mostly on former players because those are the guys that I can relate to. Those are the guys that I've been exactly where they're at, and I've been through everything that's going on, regardless of whatever sport they're leaving.
Yeah. Education and prevention. I mean, that's our mission statement. So we completely agree with you there. What do you think is what is the best way to get the prevention message across to athletes, all athletes?
I think the more of us that are out there, like the more of me's, the more Ryan Leafs, the more Hollywood Hendersons, the more guys that are out there recovering out loud. I think that the message is getting out there. I mean, I know that for a fact that I've been able to help several former NFL guys who are recovering out loud. They're going back to their clubs, and they're being they're just great role models for those guys that are coming out. And I think that's the secret, is that we can't be in silence about this disease and what it's doing and how many lives it's taken. There's going to be more Tyler Skaggs, and that's what we're trying to stop. I know here recently, just last off season, we lost 2 former Tampa Bay Buccaneers to substance abuse, Vincent Jackson and Keith McCants, and these were former 1st-round picks. And, we lost them both to substance abuse. So we've still got a lot of work to do. And our job is not ever going to be over, but it's getting that message out that it is okay to not be okay, but you got to ask for help.
Yeah. Someone asked to describe the role that your wife, who seems very powerful and influential in a positive way, how did she describe the role of your wife had in your continued recovery journey?
Well, and like I said, I say it in the book all the time. She's the real hero of my story. She's the one that hung in there. She's the one that never gave up on me. She's the one that kept the kids sane. She's the one that kept working throughout my addiction and kept a paycheck coming in. She was the one steady force throughout that whole addiction that, had it not been for her, we would have completely fallen apart, or I wouldn't be here speaking to you right now. That's for sure. So I give her all the credit. And, it was finally, she tried loving me back to health. She tried to love me back to sobriety, and that didn't work. And it wasn't until she took a step back and she set boundaries, and she set boundaries that she could keep and that the kids could keep, and that I would adhere to. It wasn't until then that I finally put my hand up and asked for help. And I would come to find out later that, consequences work. That's the one thing that all addicts and alcoholics respond to, is consequences. And whenever she laid those out for me, and whenever I started suffering some of those consequences, that's when I finally asked for help. And listen, I hit a lot of bottoms. It seems like every bottom that I hit had a trap door, and I always went deeper. And I tell people all the time that I hate to hear that you've got to let somebody hit rock bottom, because a lot of times you don't recover from your rock bottom, or you either overdose and die, or you get a felony that follows you the rest of your life and you can't get a job. So I hate hearing that you've got to let somebody hit rock bottom, but it is something that we all need to do in order to put our hand up and ask for help. And it wasn't until she let me hit rock bottom that I was able to put my hand up and ask for help. And she's been such a trooper ever since. And she's such a powerful piece when we do interventions, because she can relate to the family so well. And her greatest asset is telling people what she should have done. You know, looking back over my addiction now, and looking back over everything that she's learned in Al-Anon, and all the classes that she's taken to be a family addiction specialist, you know, everything that she's learned, she's so good at telling people what she should have done, what would have worked. And you know, I'm grateful for her, and I'm grateful for the role that she had in the book. You know, she has a big piece in the book.
How did she learn how to do those consequences, to give you those consequences? Did she just finally realize, or did she have to get some help, or, you know, some education on that?
Yeah, well, she got help, and she had people telling her what to do, but people telling you what to do and actually doing it is two different things, you know. And she'll be the first to tell you that she wanted to leave me, but God made a promise to her, and this is coming from her. You know, God made a promise to her that he was going to restore our family, and she held on to that. But she also was willing to start laying down some consequences. And, you know, that's when she packed up and left. And I'm grateful that she did, because that's when I finally, you know, it finally dawned on me that she's serious, you know, that the kids are serious. My daughter's serious. That I don't have any other options but to raise my hand. And you know, Dave, a lot of that was, you know, the fact that I wouldn't put up my hand. It wasn't about continuing to use opiates or to get high or anything. It was the fear of withdrawal. The fear of withdrawal drove me for years and years. Fear of having another seizure, you know, as a result of benzo withdrawal, or the discomfort and the pain and everything that goes with opiate withdrawal. You know, it wasn't even the opiates and all that. They weren't even working anymore. They didn't even do what they were supposed to do. All they did was keep me from getting sick. And that went on for years and years at the end of my addiction. So addiction's a crazy thing, man. It took our family for quite a ride.
That's very powerful. That is very powerful right there. Do you feel the doctors in the NFL treating the players have become more aware through through education or programs that have been put out to reduce opiate, prescribing?
Yeah, I think so. And I think they've seen that, they'll never admit to it, but they've seen the number of guys that have come through the Player Care Foundation or who have come through the NFL Players Association and sought out treatment. And usually it is opiate related. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of alcohol that's going on out there, but usually it's opiate and benzo related, because guys are leaving the game in chronic pain. And, they still have that warrior mentality where they suffer in silence, and they just throw down a handful of pills like they learned to do back when they played, and they didn't tell anybody about what was going on, or they didn't tell anybody about their injury. And that mentality still exists. So, but the NFL is definitely seeing the numbers of guys that are coming through that organization. Of course, they're hearing from me and Pro Athletes in Recovery about all the work that we're doing. And, there's a couple other organizations that are out there doing something similar to what we're doing, but usually it's, brain related or concussion related or traumatic brain injury related. And, I've got to be careful to not let these guys use that as an excuse, for their behaviors or their addictions and things like that, because, until we remove the addiction, then we can't even begin to see the amount of traumatic brain injury or CTE that might be existing in a former player. Or so, you know, we've still got our work cut out for us, but you know, to some extent, it's still going on. But I think we made the NFL more accountable over the last decade or so.
It sounds like it. How can somebody get involved in your prevention efforts? If somebody wants to,
you know what, you can find me. Go to proathletesinrecovery.org. Of course, I'm on all the social media, Sober Center 60. Look at the book. You can find the book at offcenterthebook.com, but it'll just take you to that Amazon site, so you can find it on Amazon as well. But man, I look for all the support that I can get. And I'm always looking for new ideas. If anybody has new ideas about helping guys, non-narcotic ways of treating chronic pain or injuries, I'm always open for information to do that. And I hope everybody continues to follow and support our efforts, because, you know, like I said, it's not just about former professional athletes. It's about former high school athletes and college athletes and pretty much anybody. It could be anybody driving down the road in a panel van and had a terrible wreck, and next thing you know, they're addicted to opiates, you know, because of the injuries they had. So there's a lot of people out there that's abusing that their opiate addiction started as a result of a prescription from a doctor or a dentist. You know, I can't tell you how many people I've dealt with that their addiction started with those 15 Vicodin that the dentist gave them to get over something, some oral treatment that they had. So, you know, it's out there, and we're an addicted nation. And like I said earlier, you know, the first thing we do is self-medicate.
Yeah. A couple more questions here. One of the panelists asked, was there anything in particular that stood out from your wife or family members that helped you deal with the addiction? And I think you probably touched on this, but you know, was there anything in particular that stood out that kind of got you over the edge to help you get through recognize your addiction, I guess?
You know, like I said, there was so much guilt and shame associated with that. I can remember a lot of the arguments that I would have with my kids, or have with my wife, or have with my wife and kids. You know, all the interventions that they would do on me because they, you know, I passed out or you know, whatever behavior I was doing at the time, and it was embarrassing. You know, the kids got to the point where they wouldn't even bring their friends over to our house, you know, because they didn't want their friends to be around me or to see me. They were that embarrassed. So, you know, there was a lot of little interventions that my family did, but you know, I would always deflect it back on them. You know, that was my secret weapon. And even though they knew exactly what I was doing, and they knew, and I knew what I was doing, you know, that was always my go-to. And you know, there's a lot of regrets there even now, even though I don't look back, and everybody's moved forward, and everybody is you know, my kids are helping their friends now get sober. But you know, looking back at everything that I put my family through, that was a bottom in itself, because that's not Randy Grimes. You know, I always looked at myself as a disciplined athlete that was willing to do whatever I had to as an athlete to get to the next level, or to be the best that I could be, whether it was in the weight room or running or you know, whatever it was, to be the best that I could be. And the fact that I had a 20-year addiction that I couldn't stop, it still blows my mind, because, you know, I thought I was this disciplined guy. You know, I thought I was a tough guy. I thought I could do anything, but getting sober was the hardest thing that I ever did.
Yeah, that's powerful, very powerful. Do you think mandatory surveying for substance abuse for athletes would work?
I don't think anybody would admit it, or not active players anyway.
Yeah.
I would love to do a survey on guys that have left the game maybe 6 months out, guys that there's no chance of them going back and playing for anybody else. I'd love to know their thoughts on it. I'd like to see exactly how much of off-label prescribing is still going on out there. I would like to know exactly what kind of medications that they're handing out on those team flights back home, or that trainer standing at the door handing out that wide envelope. I'd love to know what's in that now. But
what if it was anonymous?
I'm never going to get that information because nobody's ever going to admit it,
Yeah.
not while they're playing anyway.
What if it was anonymous? What if they did anonymous surveying?
That might work.
Yeah.
That might be really interesting.
Wow.
That might be something to really think about doing.
Yeah, get a better understanding of what people are using.
And not only that, but their alcohol consumption too. That concerns me as much as anything.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. What types of coping mechanisms do you use when you feel the drug urges after rehab?
Oh, wow. Well, I know for me, the one thing I learned while I was in treatment was to play the tape all the way through. I know how it ends every time. And that's, either in handcuffs or in a emergency room somewhere or in our treatment center. So at least I'm able to do that. But as far as early recovery, I tell my athletes, or I tell the people that I'm working with, to just keep it simple and just do the next right thing, because that's all recovery is doing the next right thing. And, we try to overthink it sometimes. We tell people they need to do 90 and 90, and they need to get a sponsor, and they need to work the steps and all the things that are going on in early recovery. And sometimes it's just overwhelming to people because they're trying to get back with their families. They're trying to restore relationships, trying to restore their work relationships. And I just want everybody to just keep it as easy as they can and do the next right thing. And, I've had the opportunity to have a lot of sponsees. I have a sponsor that I'm accountable to every day. And that's been the biggest part of my recovery, is staying accountable every day to somebody. Somebody hears my voice and sees my eyes every day. And that's what I need. And like I said earlier, as a former athlete, I thrive on that accountability. I want to be accountable. I want to please that person. I want to please my family. I want to do the right thing. And that's what's kept me going. And that's what keeps the guys going that I work with.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And this might be our last question. Without the NFL, if you did not make the NFL, do you think your addiction would have came out in another way, or still would have had an addiction, or still would have had some type of, issue if you didn't make it to the NFL?
I've often thought of that, and the odds say no, it wouldn't have, because like what I said earlier, and that's why I throw that in there about the fact that I didn't have any history of substance abuse in my family. There was nothing going on to indicate that I needed to be aware of it, or that it was something that I needed to be cautious of, and so that's why I say that early in my talk, because I never dreamed that this would happen. I never dreamed that I would leave the league with all those injuries and that terrible necessary evil that I talked about, but I did. And that happens, addiction happens to good people. It happens to people from all occupations, all walks of life, and it doesn't discriminate. And like I said earlier, also, it's the great equalizer. It brings us all to the same place. And I like to think that it would not have happened, but I can't say for sure. But I also could probably say that had I not played in the pros, played college football, that I wouldn't have had all the injuries that started the self-medication. So.
Yeah, well, do you have any closing words that you'd like to, give us, in the position that you're in to help people? Would you like to give any closing words?
No, I think I think everybody's probably tired of hearing from me, but I am grateful that I'm able to come on here and talk to you guys, and like I said, recover out loud. That's all I do now. You know, I get in front of as many people as I can and share my message and share the fact that recovery works. You know, but you've got to work it, and you know, I always start all my youth talks with it's okay to not be okay, but you've got to raise your hand and ask for help, because this you know, I talk a lot about stigma, and that's really real. That is everywhere out there, and that keeps so many people from getting well, because of the fact they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to address it, they don't want to tell anybody what they're going through. And I want everybody to know that it's okay. It happens to good people. You know, I work with pilots, I work with judges, I work with doctors, I work with pastors. You know, it happens to a lot of good people. And but you got to raise your hand and ask for help, because there's hope out there and there's help.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Randy, I can't thank you enough for sharing your powerful message and, you know, helping us with, again, educating the community and getting prevention, you know, getting education and prevention out there to help people with opiate abuse and all the consequences. So thank you again, Randy. And thank you, everybody, for attending. We greatly appreciate it. And please fill out the survey at the end here and help us, you know, with making this better for next year. All right. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.